For those of you who don't know me, my name is Derek Dignam. I'm temporarily chairing this session of IPEN, the International Parliamentary Engagement Network, which is being co-hosted, the meeting is being co-hosted by the IPU's Public Engagement Hub. Today's seminar is on youth parliaments. The seminar is part of our series of seminars that explores issues of public engagement with Parliament. Before we hear from our speakers, just a couple of housekeeping rules, keep everything in order. The seminar will be recorded, so please be aware of that. We'll have translation available in French and Spanish. It'll be available through the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Please keep your mic muted. Can I ask you all to check now that your mics are muted? And please do leave your cameras on, as it is nice for the presenters to see faces while they are presenting. So, in terms of our topic for today, we're dealing with youth parliaments. Youth parliaments are one of the main public engagement tools used by parliaments across the world. Their formats and models vary considerably. And while they introduce parliamentary politics to many young people, it's not always clear whether they enhance youth engagement with Parliament and politics, or indeed have any lasting results. And we might check on those issues today. The seminar will hear from specific practices and explore different models of youth parliaments. We will then have time for Q&A towards the end. So just on to our speakers, we are really delighted to have the Honourable Emma Theofelus from the Parliament of Namibia. Emma was previously a youth activist and Deputy Speaker of her youth parliament and probably still is the youngest MP in Namibia, and probably the youngest Deputy Minister of Information and Communication Technology in the Republic of Namibia and possibly worldwide. So we're delighted to have Emma with us. And of course, we have the brilliant Cristina Leston-Bandeira, who is Professor of Politics at the University of Leeds in the UK, where she also chairs IPEN and does a far better job than me most times. We're going to ask the speakers to speak for about 10 minutes each. They may go a little bit over, but about 10 minutes each, and then we will go into a full Q&A session, and I'll come back in at that stage. So I'd now like to hand the floor to Emma, please, to take us away on her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Derek, and a very good morning to everybody. Pleasure to be on this Zoom meeting. As introduced, my name is Emma Theofelus. I am a Member of Parliament and the Deputy Minister of ICT in the Republic of Namibia. And before that, I did serve in the Youth Parliament of Namibia from 2013 to 2015. And I think it's important to highlight the history of youth participation in Namibia to get a sense of why the previous national speaker at the time, the late Dr. Theo-Bandeira, who was also at some point the UN President session of the 67th UN session at the time, decided to bring it upon the legislator to actually explore having youth parliamentarians as a way to bring young people closer to parliamentary democracy. So Namibia is quite a small country, 2.5 million people, but 60% is young people under the age of 30. We have a voting age of 18 years old, which really points to the fact that if somebody really wants to win elections in Namibia, they would need to appeal to the young people's vote. But more than that, it requires young people to be politically educated and politically participating in order for them to actually want to participate in democracy. And currently, we have various ways in which young people are involved in politics. The youth think tanks, local city councils have what they call junior councils to bring learners into the outfit of junior councils for them to contribute to the governing of their cities and towns. But at a national level, it's then converged at the Youth Parliament, also known as the Children's Parliament. In 2007, we had our first session where 50 learners from across the country met for a week in the chambers of Parliament to discuss issues related to young people. 2008, the same was done. And then another session happened in 2011. And then the fourth session happened in which I was involved in 2013, which is oddly 10 years ago, when I was a grade 11 learner in high school and also serving at the time as the junior mayor of the city of Windhoek, which is our capital city. And at that time, we converged for a week as a way to bring children closer to democracy, for us to discuss issues pertaining to children and youth in Namibia, representing our various regional councils and regional leadership, representing our ethnic groups, our genders, our lived experiences, and our backgrounds. So this really brought an outfit of about 56 children and youth into one house in the Parliament chambers to really discuss issues related to children's social grants, children's education, children's health, young people's participation in politics, the voting age. More and more motions were discussed and tabled during the session. And we really debated extensively as children at the time. And we did come up with one ask to not only the legislature for change, but to the government to increase the children's social grant in order for orphans and vulnerable children to get a higher percentage of social grant that they receive from government. And as that being one of our resolutions in the Children's Parliament that was adopted, in the next financial year, the Minister of Finance adopted that resolution from the Youth Parliament. So although the Youth Parliament is not necessarily a autonomous entity that can actually make decisions on behalf of the people of the Republic of Namibia, it is seen as a legitimate outfit that is able to advise the legislator and government with children and young people's issues are concerned, in addition to many other structures, whether it's the National Youth Council or any other institutions that exist in the state. But because there is no outfit that speaks to legislation where young people are able to voice their concerns, this became a necessary entity. So fast forward, post the 1 week session itself, we were able as Speaker, Deputy Speaker, Chief Whip, and chairpersons of the various committees as young people, whether it's the Youth Committee, Health Committee, Education Committee, Safety and Security Committee for the safety of children and youth in the country, we're able to run projects and programs that speaks to changing legislation around health for children and young people, safety for children and young people, education for children and young people. And that really made us work with parliamentarians very closely because we're able to lobby parliamentarians for any laws that are on the floor, to advise the Office of the Speaker to focus on certain petitions pertaining to children and youth issues, and to be an outfit and voice for children and youth in the country where legislation is concerned. For the next 2 or 3 years, we're really able to play an advocacy role on behalf of children and youth in the country so that we're able to channel those concerns to the legislature, which we have some sort of relationship with. So we became the bridge between any activists, organizations, or any student youth organizations and Parliament, because we are a recognized and legitimized outfit that can speak on behalf of children and youth. And that really became valuable. It improved the discourse between young people in Parliament. It allowed for young people to feel closer to the parliamentary process, to influence decisions, and to allow us to really feel represented as a collective by people who look like us, who sound like us, who understand our issues like us, and sort of bridge that intergenerational discussion on how young people can be brought closer to parliamentary democracy. So fast forward to 2020, I had the privilege and honor to be appointed as Deputy Minister of ICT and be a member of Parliament. Having been a member of the Youth Parliament really made it even better to better relate to the Youth Parliament, because having been in that position before, I understand the work that the youth parliamentarians are now doing, because new parliamentarians have already replaced some of us who have now graduated out of the Youth Parliament process and are now legitimate elected members of Parliament and appointed as members of the executive of government. So it's really good to see that there could be a transition from being a youth parliamentarian to being a real parliamentarian, representing the people of Namibia, and that outfit, being the youth parliament, is a gateway to sensitizing young people such as myself about the importance of democracy and lawmaking and what that impact it has on children and young people, and be an active member, knowing that this journey could come full circle in actually becoming a member of parliament. So today, as a member of parliament, I work as sort of like a mentor to the youth parliament, guiding them in the process of, advocating and influencing decision making in parliament. What better ways they can employ to bring issues related to youth and children onto the parliament floor. Because even though I am a parliamentarian today, still, we are still very few. There aren't that many of us in the House still. So youth parliament becomes sort of a buffer for us young parliamentarians under the age of 30 to really have an outfit that is able to help champion some of the issues we bring to the floor, and to ensure that we have some buffer on the issues we'd like to champion on the parliament floor. So that is the experience of Namibia. The biggest hurdles have been actually making the youth parliament effective by ensuring that it has the necessary budget for these young people to do their work. Not every entity or politician understands the value of it, so they do not always see why the dollar needs to go to young people becoming more informed about the parliamentary democracy process, and for them being participants and not just observers of the parliamentary democracy process. So funding has been the biggest hurdle, because these young parliamentarians should do their parliamentary work. They should go across the country and get the mandate from young people and children in order for them to come and advocate for them in the House. So that requires them to go out and do that parliamentary work among children and youth across the country. That requires some funding. And of course, another issue would be, of course, have them having the ability to champion certain causes, and actually having parliamentarians stand behind them and cheer them on. That is also something I would like to implore on any other parliamentarians or other civil society organizations that understand the value of youth parliaments to stand behind these young parliamentarians to champion their causes, because they are the bridge between the formal parliament and this outfit that is meant to transition young people into decision making and for them to understand parliamentary processes and the process of lawmaking. So I hope that gives you an insight of what has been happening in Namibia for a good 15 years now. It has grown strength to strength, I'm happy to say, and we expect that it can become a more frequently meeting parliamentarian outfit, as opposed to only one session every 2 years, because a lot can happen in 2 years. And funding being the biggest underlying factor here, that if these sessions can ensure that they meet at least twice a year, this requires really some funding, but this would also have benefits, because as young people get exposed to the lawmaking process and the importance of being parliamentary, knowledgeable about the parliamentary process, we can expect parliaments to get younger and for parliaments to have a more balanced representation of citizens in a country where 60% of the population in Namibia is made up of young people. That should be reflected in the senior parliament as well. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic, Emma. Thank you so much for that presentation. There's some really interesting concepts there about young youth parliaments becoming advisory for government to take on some of the proposals made that concern young people, the concept of the bridge, the transition gateway into becoming full members of parliament. And then you've highlighted some of the issues that you obviously need to have resolved around budget, improving understanding, participation versus observation, support from the older parliamentarians, and then funding to travel around it. So you've really highlighted a full landscape of issues there, Emma, and we are grateful to you for that. I'm going to invite questions at the end, so can I now invite Cristina to give her presentation. Cristina, will you take it away, please? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Derek, and thank you so much, Emma. That was so interesting. I didn't know anything about the youth parliament experience in the Republic of Namibia, and that's really, really interesting. And it's really nice to see so many familiar faces too, like Ingrid from Inter-Parliamentary is just in front of me, and Caroline Wallace from all the way from New Zealand, and seeing people from all over the place. It's really lovely to be here. So what I'm going to do is just really give some brief reflections and give more of a sort of an overview of youth parliaments and how they have developed and what the research shows in terms of what works, what maybe doesn't work, the different models, because there's a lot of models out there, as I'm sure you're all aware. There's many people in here from different parliaments, and I'm sure you all will have a different story to say about your own practices. And obviously there isn't one single model that works. It's depending on the context, depending on your parliament, on the culture of your country, and the politics of your country. So youth parliaments started developing in the 1990s. I think the first known, so if anyone knows of an earlier one to that, please do let me know, because what we know in the literature and research is one from 1994 in France. There's other things similar to youth parliaments before, but they're not actually a youth parliament of bringing people together. So Le Parlement des Enfants, the children's parliament in France in 1994, was very important as a creation and is a model that has been reproduced elsewhere. And so youth parliaments have been created and used to support young people in terms of their socialization into the system, to politics, to educate young people into politics, but also to encourage them to be interested in politics and to encourage them to get involved in politics. Some models are more about thinking about how to sort of almost train young politicians, and some models are very much about forming the politicians of the future. But actually there's many others are not necessarily about that. It's just more about education, about understanding how parliament works, how the political system works. And it's about really enhancing engagement with the political system. Now, the more these initiatives are sort of elite-led, or the selection is elite-led, the less likely that engagement, true engagement politics is likely to happen. The more the process is detached from actual parliament, the less that engagement is likely to happen. And I'll finish my notes with reminding us of those things that make for what makes for really good engagement through a youth parliament. So in terms of the different models, a lot of youth parliaments take a whole year. Some youth parliaments take a whole of 2 years, but there's also lots of just ad hoc events, just, come in for 1 week and explore parliament, or even just a weekend. So there's lots of different models in that level. I'd say that, I mean, it depends what they're doing, it depends how they're shaped, but it's a sort of experience that you do need time, as Emma very well illustrated there from her own experience and everything they were able to achieve. Engaging young people, making young people understand the system and making them getting involved in the system and then being listened to by the system takes time. And it's not necessarily something that you can do just through an ad hoc event, but it depends what you're trying to achieve. Often these youth parliaments are linked to the secondary school system, or to the school system in the country. So, for instance, in Portugal and in many other countries, the work is done between the parliament and actually the schools. And so elections take place throughout the schools, throughout the whole country, using the electoral system of the country, who then elect, so the schools elect representatives for those schools, and then through the departments, or, there's lots of different ways of doing it. And then those are the people who end up in the youth parliament. But there's also models in which the youth parliament is actually almost independent from parliament. That's the UK system. So the UK is actually a very recent one, and the whole UK youth parliament is organised by a separate civic organisation, the Youth Council, the British Youth Council, and there's involvement of sort of civic organisations in these youth parliaments in quite a few countries. So it's not necessarily just done by parliament, and I think that's something important to bear in mind, thinking particularly of the budget and the resources issue that Emma referred there before, is that sometimes these things can be done in partnership with other organisations, such as the Ministry of Education, such as civic organisations. There's usually a very wide range of ages, but they tend to be, the vast majority of them tend to be 16 plus. But there is a lot also of youth parliaments that deal with primary school age children. Some countries have a youth parliament for a younger age and then for an older age. And again, obviously that will require different types of approaches. And in terms of the selection of these young people, young members, so some of them, as I've already alluded, go just through elections, and that's, you could say that that's almost the best way to do it, because then young people are experiencing themselves the whole process of election. But then again, there's lots of different ways of doing that. You know, are the candidates able to campaign for their manifestos? Are they able to then propose specific legislation for that? But those leaders who have an election tend to be the richer types of experiences. There's quite a few youth parliaments where the young members of the youth parliament are actually selected by an elite, by a group of people within parliament, or by a group of people who know about politics, on the basis of, for instance, essays. So you can write an essay and explain why you'd be a good young person for your parliament. Obviously, those are also interesting, but what those do is that they tend to lead to the usual suspects being the youth members of this parliament. You know, people who maybe wouldn't already be engaged, people who would already know about politics, and you tend to maybe not get those young people who may not know anything about politics and who are just fired up by an issue, which should get more if they are elected by their peers. If their peers say, well, there's a problem here in our community, we should do something about that. So again, it's the same idea. The more they experience the politics, the more rich the engagement will be. I didn't say at the beginning, but I should have said that there's a report by the IPU actually saying that more than half of all parliaments across the world have a form of youth parliament. So it is one of the main activities that parliaments dedicate to young people. And then the type of activities that these youth parliaments do, that's really, really important. It's almost like stating the obvious, but the more that the activity actually mirrors what a parliament does, the more they're experimenting what a parliamentary system is, but also the more possibility they get engaged with the politics, and the more they're likely to actually have an impact beyond their own experience. And so some systems include the selection of topics to work on. So young people may go in their school, may decide this is a proposal, this is a law that we think we should be doing. Like, for instance, in France, that's a process they do, and then little by little select that. Some of those selection of topics can lead to proposals of legislation, but also to inquiries, and then a lot of those can then lead to actually proposals of legislation that then picked up by the parliament. And we'll put a link in the chat for a good practice case study that the IPU has been working on from the Republic of South Korea, of their Children's Assembly, which is a really interesting example of a very rich example of how to do a youth parliament, engaging people, young people throughout the country, and then actually leading to the work on legislation, which then actually can lead and has led to change in legislation. But some obviously don't go as much depth as that. So there is a question mark about these, you know, which ones work best, and are they just a tokenist initiative? Are they just something that, you know, it just looks good to do, you know, getting all these young people to come together, but do they actually do something? And I'd say that the way to assess that is, on one hand, the effect on the young people. You know, does it change those young people? Does it make them more active and more engaged? On the other hand, the effect on the actual political system. Do the members, the actual parliament, pay notice to these young people? So are they in initiatives that end up going to be considered by the actual parliament? And there is a little bit of, there's not a lot of research, but there's a little bit of research in this area. And there's a couple of really interesting articles by Shepherd and Matt Patricius that show that youth parliaments do fulfill a range of different functions, from obviously political education, but also skills acquisition to political engagement, which is really important, participation, and even policy impact. But something that they show, and this is a study that they have on the Scottish Youth Parliament, is that being a member of these parliaments does lead to further activism and further volunteering later in life. However, that tends to be mainly amongst those who would tend to be already active. So when that's the case, then you feel like you're missing out on something. Of course, it's great that you're supporting young people who want to be active, but maybe one of the things of Youth Parliament is to also make sure that those who would not get involved in politics, or who come from a socio-economic background that would not lead to politics, get inspired to get involved in politics. And I'll at the end, I'll speak about my favorite Youth Parliament example that I think does do that. There's also really interesting research by, and maybe they're here because some of them are members of IPEN, Didier Calouverts and some colleagues, Mathieu Vridag and Sylvia Herzel. They do a really interesting study of the Belgium Youth Parliament, and they establish 5 principles to assess youth parliaments. And those 5 principles are the quality of the representation, and here I go back to, you know, what are the processes that these young people have to represent others? And as Emma referred to earlier, they need to have the budget to be able to go and ask their constituents what they think about the issues. The quality of the participation in terms of how they actually participate in the whole process, the openness of the agenda. So, you know, how open is it that they bring their own ideas, or is that determined by Parliament? Some parliaments choose a topic, for instance, and then the proposals have to be on that topic. Other parliaments just leave it completely open and suggested by bottom up by the young people. And the 4th principle is meaningful impact. Does it actually have meaningful impact in processes? Does it have impact on the young people, on Parliament overall? And the 5th principle is enlightened understanding. So in terms of their understanding themselves of the politics and parliamentary system. From all these studies, I summarize that into 3 key factors that are important to bear in mind that enhance the value of youth parliaments. The first one is the way in which young MPs are recruited. Are they actually recruited by their peers? Are they recruited in a way that will ensure a really good diverse representation? Or are they just, is it a very close type of recruitment? And if it's chosen on the basis of an essay, for instance, it's very unlikely to be very open and diverse. The second key factor is the depth of involvement with the parliamentary process. So are they actually, and for this you need a time, as Emma was referring to earlier, are they actually proposing legislation or doing an inquiry or going out into the country to talk to other young people? What is the depth of involvement that they have? And then the third key factor to enhance the value of youth parliaments is the way they link or not with parliamentary business. If they're linked with parliamentary business, meaning there is a process in which their proposals is being considered by members, that is likely to then give more value to the youth parliament and to the young people and to the members themselves and parliaments in terms of the way they consider issues raised by young people. And so from all those three key factors, from the youth parliaments that I know, and I don't know about all of them, and it'll be really lovely to hear about people here in the call about your own experiences. But to me, the Welsh Youth Parliament from Wales, which is a nation within the UK, is a really good example of a youth parliament that touches all of those keys, because the selection it's got a mixed selection. 40 of their members, they've got 60 members, 40 of their members are elected by young people across Wales through elections, and then 20 are elected through partner organisations. Those partner organisations play a very important role, because those partner organisations are organisations that support young people across Wales, and they might be organisations that support people, I don't know, with homelessness or with problems of drug addiction, or we just support low social economic support. So its organizations are really embedded in society. And this comes back to the point that Emma was making earlier, that working with civil society is really important. And then the depth of involvement, the Welsh Youth Parliament lasts 2 years. I'm just finishing now, Derek.
Okay, thank you.
The Welsh Youth Parliament lasts 2 years, and they choose 3 topics and then do inquiry. They meet in lots of committees in between. So Emma referred there the issue that only meeting once or twice. In here, they're trying to meet in committees in between that period. And then finally, there's a joint declaration by the Parliament and the Welsh Youth Parliament, and members, the MS, do consider the propositions by the Welsh Youth Parliament. So it's a good example, but I'm sure there's plenty others out there. And we've already mentioned the Children's Assembly in South Korea. So these are just a few reflections, and it'll be great to hear of other experiences, or anyone who's got any questions to clarify anything. Hope it was useful.
Great. No, that was super. I mean, it's always wonderful just to hear from somebody who is scanning the complete landscape and to make us aware that there are so many different models out there, but then to unify that analysis with the 5 principles and, as you said, and the 3 key factors, because that gives people who are trying to organize these engagements some sort of matrix or reference that they can hang on to. And if they're designing something or part of something, they can see whether or not it has the potential to make an impact. Okay, so we're going to go to Q&A. If you would like to raise your hand or pop something into the chat, we'll keep an eye on the chat. If I don't see exactly, I'm not sure, I can't see. If anyone sees hands raised, please let me know. I might not have a full visibility on all hands being raised.
Everyone is very shy at the moment. Oh, there's one hand, Joseph.
Is there? Sorry, and I don't see anything in the chat. And thank you, Tamar, for putting in the South Korea reference. Joseph, please, from. Can you see, Christina? I can't see it.
From the Landtag of Salzburg, so I imagine from Germany, probably. Yeah. And
okay.
Alanda.
Joseph, yeah, off you go.
Yes, thank you for the talks, which were really of great interest to me. Thank you to you both. I have one question. In your research, did you come across examples where the members of a youth parliament would be recruited by sortition? Because we do this way in Salzburg.
A sortation, you mean what, Joseph?
Like aleatory way, just picking somebody randomly on a random basis from some sort of register, like a citizens assembly or something like this.
Okay, a random selection. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Great. I don't know, would either of you, Emma or Christina, would you like to come in on that, please?
I can do. Yeah, I think there's quite a few that are based on sortition, on random selection, and follow the idea of the citizens' assembly principle. Not necessarily always linked to a parliament, though, and not necessarily done on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, Joseph. The world is a very big place, so it doesn't mean that because there's no research on it that I don't know about. But I have heard of a few that youth assemblies linked to parliaments, not necessarily run by parliaments, done through sortition, like a model of citizen assembly. So I would be really interested to hear more about the way you do it in Salzburg. And the ones that I know of tend to be at local, regional level, because of doing those sort of events at sort of a national, bigger country, it's far harder. But at local level or regional, sub-state level, I have heard of them happening before. But it would be good to hear more about how you do it.
Joseph, you could perhaps drop a link into the chat on the way you randomly select your youth participants. Okay, I see we have Amna Kauser. Excuse me for the pronunciation. If you could have your question, please, and then Eduardo Silva.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Amna Kauser. I am from Pakistan, and I am the manager of Youth Parliament Pakistan, which is managed by a non-profit entity over here. Pakistani Parliament does not have an officially regulated or government regulated youth parliament body with its national parliament, but the Youth Parliament Pakistan that I'm affiliated with has been working since 2005. My question is to Cristina. I think there were some very interesting points that were raised in a question, but particularly I wanted to ask that for us since 2005, our process of recruiting young parliamentarians has been through, like you said, essay questions. We, give them like a form, which is called an expression of interest form. And we ask certain essay questions, about what do they think about the performance of their elected representative and how do they want to utilize the platform, etc. But I think it's no secret that even existing parliaments, elected parliaments around the world, they are often criticized for not being as representative of their constituent populations or the country overall. So keeping that in mind, if when you said that elections would make more sense because there are more chances of then the youth parliament body to be more representative. I'd just like you to elaborate on that when we see that even adult youth parliaments are not even properly represented. How would youth parliament holding elections, and which would be much more challenging for in developing countries like Pakistan, where we are still struggling to make our elected representatives and government officials to understand the value of the youth parliament, and conducting elections and budgetary constraints, all of that come into play. So how do you think that it would be more representative if we do go through the process of elections and sort of like a comparison between the process of an essay-based questionnaire or something like that and versus elections? I hope I got my question right I hope I was able to elicit my question.
That's fine, Amna. Thank you. Cristina.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna, for your question, and thank you very much for being here. I would be really, really interested in hearing more about the way you do it. And yeah, absolutely. I'm not, when I said about having elections, it's always, I was talking about in terms of the depth of engagement. So if you're able to do elections, and that's because young people will be experiencing themselves the process of elections, the process of politics, the process of campaigning, and and having and competing campaigning with other people and putting their points and all of that. That's not to say it's the only way to do it. And as I said at the beginning of my reflections, these are just ideal types and different models, but each context is really important to bear in mind. I really like your point about why should we have the youth parliament more representative if the main parliament is not representative anyway, but that's what sort of we should be aiming for in the perspective of civic engagement. If we're bringing young people to politics, obviously, hopefully in all countries, we'd want as diverse representation as possible. And so what best way to do it than starting with young people? So if young people go to the youth parliament and their youth parliament feels representative of society more so than the national parliament, what a great legacy, what a great impact to have on young people to show it is possible to do it. But absolutely, elections do require more resources. But there's other ways of doing it also by partnering up with civic organisations. So that's why I like the Welsh Youth Parliament example, in that a third of their members are elected through partner organizations. So you are yourself a civic organization. Maybe you could do a coalition of other civic organizations across Pakistan. And I'm sure there'll be organizations in Pakistan that supports particular groups of people, and how amazing it would be if those people usually don't have a voice in politics, if you could bring a voice through your youth parliament. I hope that answers your question, but by all means, do drop me an email later if you want to chat more about it.
Okay. I think
thank you so much, Derek.
Sorry?
If I can get in there, Derek, to just...
Yes, of course.
share Namibia's experience. So I think from our experience, political will is important. And for the first youth parliamentarians, the political will of the speaker was important for him to leave some legacy of having a youth parliamentarian. So maybe lobbying for a strong parliamentarian to propose this as sort of a legacy outfit for them might help, but political will comes in very handy. And then the second thing I'd like to address is, how youth parliamentarians get into parliament. So how we do it is we have an election across the country's 14 regions. So we have 14 regions in the country, and 4 youth parliamentarians come from each region. But it's only from a school level. So school-going children have the benefit of this. And then the speaker, once he has the 4 elected representatives from each region, would then look at the makeup of the collective parliamentarians, and then actually appoint those who can come without election. In the past, out-of-school youth came to the youth parliament because the speaker was able to ensure that at least 2 out-of-school young people were represented, so that their voice is represented in the youth parliament. And then young people living with disabilities. If no young person living with disabilities is elected, the speaker has the right to appoint 1 or 2 to come. And then the third one is marginalized children and young people. So we have marginalized communities in Namibia, the San and Ovahimba, who are still very indigenous and do not necessarily go to school. And basically there are mobile schools for their children, but they do not necessarily, their way of life are not consistent with children going to school and any of the formal stuff that we do in the state. So the speaker is allowed to then personally appoint 2 or 3 of those young people from those communities who do not necessarily fit the criteria of an election in the ordinary way of doing things in a school. So those are some of our experiences, and that has shown that everybody's included and that there is inclusivity. But the speaker, having the political will, is able to champion for it.
That is so interesting. Thank you so much, Emma.
Yeah, that's a brilliant intervention, Emma, because we do the same thing in Ireland. We balance our youth participation for gender, disability, and marginalised communities, and I think that that's a really, really important intervention that you've just made. Emma, while you have the floor, there's a question to you about how you made the transition to the executive happen. So I think people are interested in you're so young, people are interested in your journey from youth parliaments to full MP. Maybe you just give us a couple of sentences on that. We've 13 minutes left. Okay.
So just a bit of background on me. I started youth activism at 13. I was part of a civil society organization that championed for children's rights. There was no law in Namibia that dealt with children's rights in Namibia. And so I started an organization called the Children's Movement and the Children's Federation that brought all civil society organizations that work with children together to champion for the Child Care and Protection Act, a bill at the time that was being drafted for 20 years. And it was finally passed, and it was passed through the activism we did. We petitioned, we marched, and it was finally passed. And when it was passed, I really took a liking to law, so I decided to study law. So I'm a lawyer by profession. And so when I studied law, I continued my activism in student politics, in youth politics, in party politics, because I think once you're a youth parliamentarian, depending on the politics of your country, you must also understand that you cannot always be an independent and come into the national parliament or into politics without the necessary support of a political party in some instances. Yes, it is possible, but for a young person getting into politics at 23 years old, it is almost impossible in my country, in the African continent, and I believe across the world. So I learned very quickly when I did my activism at university was that I needed to join a political party, which I did, of course, join, but be active in. And when I did become active in the political party, because of my track record of being a young activist, junior mayor of my city, deputy speaker of the Children's Parliament, I was very knowledgeable about the lawmaking process. I knew Parliament almost in and out. I knew almost any parliamentarian because I was a member of the Youth Parliament. I knew the process very, very well. So that, I think, gave me a leg up because of knowing the system. And on top of that, studying law, we had our national election in 2019. I graduated from law school in 2019 and became very active in supporting a presidential candidate who I believe would be the best candidate for the country. And when he won, he then appointed me as a member of parliament and deputy minister of ICT. So I've contracted the journey quite short. There is a lot of nuance and a lot of information in between, but the transition from youth parliament to the national parliament, in my experience, is that you need to continue the course. You need to continuously be in the vicinity of politics, and also acknowledge that, you know, youth parliament is more about advocacy. It's not compounded with the general politics as politics come. And that is a different ballgame from national politics. So there is a serious transition, and there is a lot to get used to from, you know, an activism point of view to a real political, national political and national parliament point of view.
It sounds also like you put in a lot of hard work, Emma. So can I go to Eduardo Silva, please? And can we make our interventions really short, please, so I can try and I want to go to Cambo Marcialo, though I think Cambo's question is in the chat, and then I want to get in Sven, if I can, from Germany, please. So Eduardo, very short, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Emma and Cristina, for the brilliant presentation, and Derek to be the chair of the section. I would like to do two questions, one for Cristina and another one for Emma. To Emma, I would like to listen, Emma, about the regional councils dynamics. Is it they are linked to parliament? How it works? Young people can deliberate in this space. And for Cristina, I would like to know if you know some experiences of selections to young parliament who starts in schools, because we have some experience like that in Brazil. Then it's that shared topic.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Super. Emma first, please. Just less than a minute, please, Emma, if you don't mind.
Sure. So yes, we do have regional councils that have sort of junior councils. So these young people they elected from their school in that particular region, and they sort of shadow regional councillors. So the regional council has to ensure they have a budget to bring these young people together, at least to sit once a year, maybe for a day or 2 days, and then discuss issues related to the region where children and young people are concerned. So yes, it does require some political will. They need to put a budget in place. They need to put a coordinating mechanism in place, and they need to listen to what those young people say about the regional dynamics in that region in order for them to have an insight on what children and young people are doing. So the regional councils independently themselves have to take this initiative to ensure that they have young people shadowing them and putting a voice to young people's issues in that particular region.
Okay, Cristina, please.
Thank you.
Yes, schools definitely, Eduardo. At least France and Portugal do it and have done it for a very long time. And I'm pretty sure many other places do, but those two come to my mind now, but others do too. And that's a great process, but it takes a long time.
Okay. Cambo Martial, please. Je vois que vous avez une question dans le chat. Comment se fait le choix pour les 3 personnes pour présenter les jeunes dans votre pays? J'imagine que c'est un... Tout le monde peut répondre à cette question dans le chat. Cambo.
I can ask my question in French, please.
Allez.
I can ask my question in French.
Oui. Allez-y.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Cambo Martial. I'm from Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. Je voulais que l'expérience de Emma est quand même glissante, mais sachant que les jeunes se intéressent plus trop à la politique en Afrique, parce que quand on vote, c'est les dirigeants un peu qui dépassent les 70 ans qui nous gouvernent. Donc, comment intéresser les jeunes à la politique? Parce que la politique, c'est aussi un moyen d'être libre.
Your sound
La
is breaking up.
seconde question, c'est par rapport au financement des parlements des jeunes. De mon pays, ça existe, mais c'est les autorités gouvernementales.
Your sound is breaking up. Your sound is breaking up, but I think your question is how to keep young people interested in politics. Okay.
Oui, ça c'est la première question.
Oui,
Maintenant, la seconde question is le financement du Parlement des jeunes.
Okay, so the financing of young people's parliaments. Okay, Cristina, I think perhaps would you just like to take that a very brief response?
Thank you.
Okay, and you're from Côte d'Ivoire, right? We got that. Okay, Cristina, can you take that, please?
I think Emma is more qualified to talk about how we can engage young people in African countries than myself.
Yeah.
In terms of funding, what I would say, there's a comment by Joseph in the chat about EU funding. There will be other organizations in there which have a lot of funding just specifically about youth engagement, and it might be worth looking at those programs and see if there's something in there that they might be able to use in Côte d'Ivoire.
Emma, would you like to comment?
Yeah, it's yes. I mean, I think youth participation in politics all over the world is a challenge, depending on the particular country. But to ensure that young people continuously are interested in politics, it's to engage them. So adjacent to the youth parliament, because I did say it only meets twice a year. When I became a parliamentarian myself in 2020, I decided to start a program called Bring a Buddy to Parley. And it's a program basically to bring young people to Parliament for a week. Because I'm now in the system and I have access to these parliamentarians, I can elbow them to interact with these young people, face to face, unfiltered, for them to pour their hearts out. With no cameras, in a boardroom to discuss with their parliamentarians. So Bring a Buddy to Parley is basically teaching young people about the parliamentary process and then interacting with a real parliamentarian, where in most cases parliamentarians are not always accessible to young people. So I think this sparks some interest. It will take a long time. It's not going to happen overnight. It will take a long time, but efforts like this, I think, will bring young people closer to politics and parliament, and I think that will be valuable.
Okay, thank you so much. Can I move to Sven, please, for a quick question? 30 seconds, Sven, for your question.
Hi, thank you for an interesting meeting today. My question is to Cristina, and you talked about the possible effects on the people that participate and also policy impact. But I think one more dimension that we need to take into account for all forms of engagement is indirect effects, even to those people that have not participated, just the fact that these things are done. And the question is, how do we measure it? How do we evaluate these effects? That's a question, comment.
Thanks, Sven. I think that's for Christine, is it?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I don't think I can answer that in 30 seconds, but I can say that definitely I agree that it's not just the impact on the people, but it's also about being known. And so that's something about, if you have a really good youth parliament, like in Namibia, it sounds amazing, just shout out about it and talk about it so that everyone in the country knows about it and wants to be involved with it. I just want to add that Emma's point about other forms of engagement, it's really important. Youth parliament, if you're going to youth parliament, do have resources for it and do it properly, but there's so many other things you can do. And we have Caroline Wallace here, who spoke in New Zealand, all the things that they're doing there. For instance, the youth reference group, the speakers days, and the taking the buddy to parliament. I love that Emma's talked about. So there's lots of things that can supplement the youth parliament experience.
Okay, can I just say Emma has kindly dropped her Gmail into the chat. So for questions that we haven't reached, Emma, is it okay if people email their questions to you later and perhaps continue this online? Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, it's okay.
Thank you, Eduardo. Yeah. Okay, can I go to Bassem, please? Probably our last question, just very quickly because we're running out of time.
Thank you, Derek. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. We're noticing the increased number of many young parliamentarians, but they're either individual parliamentarian members or part of a much larger political parties with a wider focus. So would it be the right time or a reasonable solution to have a a young political party is focusing mainly on youth issues, or it's better to remain part of a larger political group with a much able reach to convince and pass on bills. Luckily in Bahrain, the direction of the country is in line of supporting the youth issues, and we were very lucky to pass many bills that supports young people and deal with their issues. But if it's not the case, then I think the youth issues needs to have a proper platform other than just a youth parliament, but maybe a political party that advocates for that. Thank you.
Emma, would you have a quick reaction, please, and then Cristina?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think in Namibia, we are now also starting to see that young people are becoming politicians and running for public office and being appointed to positions of leadership. But having in our context, having a youth party that, of course, advocates for youth issues in politics might isolate the political party, because majority of the leadership in politics is still quite older. And that could alienate young people from the wider range of politics, and might get them out. So I think young people finding ways into politics in existing structures and also as independent candidates for political office, I think might be more sustainable than an outfit or a political party that is standalone for young people, because some of these political parties have been here for quite a long time. They know the system in and out, and the system is not always friendly to young parliamentarians. It's not always friendly to young people entering politics. So it might get them out quicker than for them to actually stay in politics for longer. So I think for now, while we are still having this way of thinking, even for citizens, I mean, I joined parliament when I was 23 years old. It was still a challenge, people not understanding that somebody who's 23 years old could make decisions on their behalf, although the population is 60% under the age of 30. So there's still a long way to go. So having a youth political party alone might make it difficult, just from my own experience. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Cristina, do you want to have a final word on that question?
Just totally agree with
attach, detach is the question, I think. Yeah.
Totally agree with Emma. I think it's much better to try to integrate young people throughout politics than putting them in one corner. I think that sort of defeats the object of engaging young people and changing our politics. So yeah, I would totally agree with what Emma said.
Okay, so can I at this stage draw it to a close? Cristina, this could have gone on for 2 hours, Cristina, I think. But in any event, can you show your appreciation for the speakers? I want to thank them all on your behalf, to the interpreters, and to everyone who attended. Can I ask the speakers to stay on the call so we can thank you and say our goodbyes properly? The next seminar will be on the 6th of September. It will deal with education provision and teacher training programs, and we will be hearing from the Brazilian Congress and from the UK Parliament. I see some names mentioned there, but I will just leave that for the moment until everything is confirmed, and we will drop all details into the chat. So at this stage, could I invite speakers to stay online? Thank you all. Have a good rest of morning, rest of afternoon, rest of evening, and we will see you on the 6th of December at the next seminar.